Welcome to the Always Becoming podcast with Dr. Lynn Santiago. Dr. Lynn and her guests explore two questions: who am I? And are we always becoming? We all have a becoming story. Be inspired by the personal becoming stories told by guests who share the risks and challenges, the successes and the letdowns, the joys and the heartaches they experience while on their own becoming journey. Here's your host, Dr. Lynn Santiago.
Hi, I am so glad that you are here today. I know you will not be disappointed. Today's guest is mythopoetic writer and storyteller Melissa Quaye. If you do not know what mythopoetic means, you are not alone. I didn't know, and it is one of the many things that I learned during my interview with Melissa. Melissa shares that myth gives us a language that helps find meaning in our lives. She explains that myth is the deepest substructure of the psyche. If you love Carl Jung, or you want to learn more about Carl Jung's work, then you definitely have to listen to this episode. Melissa has a wealth of knowledge and understanding of Jung. Jung is pretty complex, but Melissa beautifully puts into words what she believes Jung would say if I asked Jung, are we always becoming? Melissa shares a chapter of her own becoming story that includes being born into the Jehovah Witnesses. Her parents and grandparents were Jehovah Witnesses, and then even her husband. She started to question what she had been taught not to question, and she came to some pretty powerful realizations that ultimately led to her and her husband leaving the Jehovah Witnesses. And this was despite some pretty painful consequences of losing most of their family. You know, it takes a lot of courage to challenge your beliefs and to follow your own truth. Melissa is incredibly courageous. So, without further ado, here is Melissa Quaye.
Hello, Melissa.
Hi, Dr. Lynn.
Hi. Good to see you and good to meet you.
Yes, you too. Yes, nice to meet you.
I thank you so much for being here and taking out some of your time. And I understand you're coming from Edinburgh, Scotland. So our time is a bit different. And so it's evening for you.
Yes, it's evening, but it's a good time. I've got little ones, so they're a little bit settled. So it's a good time to chat. Yeah.
Awesome. I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is probably cutting into your bedtime ritual time for the kids, but
no, it's okay. They're all good.
Okay. So I thank you for being here. I've been really curious about you. I got really interested when I started to see your your Instagram posts, and I thought, wow, your posts are very different. You know, they're not sort of the typical things that you see on Instagram. You know, I just love the artwork that you have on your posts, all the books that are just amazing. It's like, wow, she's really reading some deep stuff.
Yeah, I really like reading and studying as well, yeah.
And beautiful photography.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So definitely, listeners, you got to check Melissa's Instagram. It's at Storytelling Woman. Right?
Yeah, storyteller woman. Yeah, that's right.
That was also what intrigued me because that podcast is about always becoming, and I always talk about becoming stories, right? And stories, our life story, our journey, and so the storytelling woman was like, that's And
it's important, isn't it? Stories are really, really fundamental to our human nature. So it's something that's very close to my heart. So, yeah.
You refer to yourself as a mythopoetic writer, and I'm going to ask you what that means later. But first, that very first question that I ask is, what do you think? Are we always becoming?
Yeah, I think it's a never-ending process that you throughout the course of your life. I don't think you ever stop becoming who you are. I think it's something that you're always. It is a journey, and it's what gives us meaning to our lives. So definitely, definitely is a process of always becoming. Yes.
So, what is okay? I've got mythopoetic writer. What does that mean?
So it's the exploration of myth, and sort of using myth to explain things in our lives. It's like the deepest substructure of the psyche, that gives us a sort of language that helps people to find that meaning, so that they can, keep growing into who they are. And also, for me, myth's very important because it's very healing. And this sort of a symbolic language in our myth all over the world, that is very, very, it's a vital part of what it means to be human. So it's very, very important. So I tend to write about those things, the symbolic meaning in myth, and sort of bringing it to the surface and applying it to our immediate lives.
Yeah, one of the things that in kind of learning more about you is that I went onto your website and I was like, wow, you've got all of these books that I'm assuming that you read. Well, I know you read, right? And then you do this analysis on them, right? And just, I have to tell you, I had to go and grab my Pinocchio book. That is actually a copyright 1927 book that I found in an antique bookstore, like an antique books place. The book is like this thick, and it's so, and I remember when I got it, I said, this is not a typical Pinocchio story that, you teach, you read your kids and the kind of the message is don't lie or your nose grows big, right? I said, there's gotta be more to this book. And I put it away until I looked at your website and I said, oh, okay, there's a lot more meaning to this. So can you share, whether it be that book or any other book, what would be, if it's not that, any other book that is one of your favorites that you have really helped you on your own journey?
Well, I think with all myth, they're pretty inexhaustible in their meaning, and I think that's the beauty of mythology, that you can keep coming back to it, and you'll always find things that'll have it'll take on new meaning, or you'll get a greater meaning in the story. In terms of a favorite, I have so many.
I would imagine. Yeah. It's like you read a new one every 2 weeks. Like, how did she get through these books?
I mean, I think I quite like the Handmaiden's Tale. And I've been most recently reading that one along with The Fisher King. That's a lovely myth that's quite well known to a lot in analytical circles, about the feeling function, which is something that's really missing in our culture. Other, I mean, it's not strictly myth, but a lot of the stories, I quite like the Old Testament, not in a religious sense, but as in a very hugely symbolic sense, because I do think, for example, the story of Esther, they're very, very important in terms of understanding specifically the process of female individuation, a woman's becoming, which have been quite missed out in the culture that we live in, which is more masculine and mind orientated. So I think any myth really that is more to do with that feeling function, I love anything like that, and I enjoy sort of looking for the treasures and the nuggets of gold in those myths that teach us more about that, which is so easily discarded in the world we live in. Yeah, often.
I took a quote, I wrote it down. It was on a post, and I think it was a post that you had about a book, but the quote was, aspect of goddess is unconscious in the West. Aspects of goddess is unconscious in the West.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think getting less and less. So I think there's a lot more conversation on that now than there has been in the past, which is really exciting, because we do definitely need to sort of balance out those forces. The way I see it is very much we need like an economy of compassion, people that are more related to one another through that function. And I think, once that rises more and more, there'll be a greater capacity for people to relate to one another in more human ways. So it is bringing that aspect very much more into the Western consciousness, really, which I do think is happening. It's not a time for anyone to be scarce with those sort of feelings and getting in touch with that side of ourselves and compassion at the moment. It's been, I think, a quite rough few years for so many. So I do see that. Maybe it's maybe my perspective, but I don't know if you see it too. But I do think on some levels people are starting to see more and more the value in those things than ever.
Yes, I agree. At the very least, it has presented all of us an opportunity, right? It's like an opportunity to open your eyes a little bit wider and become more aware, and then to make some conscious choices about how you want to respond to what's happening. And I think we've seen some really great and encouraging and wonderful things, and then we've seen some not so great, things,
definitely.
And then it's a little bit surprising, actually, for me sometimes when I think, oh my gosh, I thought we were much more ahead of that.
Yeah, I know.
So
it's been a very revealing time, I think, all around. Yeah,
exactly. It's definitely revealing. Yes. So I know you read a lot of Jung. And Jung, how do you say it? Jung?
Jung, yeah.
Jung. Okay, I say Jung, but I hear people say Jung.
Yeah, maybe it depends where you're from. No, I say the same as you, I think, yeah.
So, what do you think he would answer if I asked him, are we always becoming?
Well, a lot of what he taught was to do with the process of individuation, which is very much it is becoming. He spoke a lot about the inner child, which is the aspects of the personality which are always becoming. So it's very much something that is very in line with what Jung taught, and what a lot of people post Jung as well, like Hellman. That process is very much in line with all that. So yeah, very important.
There's so many great thinkers that have their own perspective on the concept, right, of always becoming, and they use different words like self-actualizing, becoming more authentic, becoming more conscious, all of those kinds of things.
Self-realization, a lot of different words for the same sort of process, I think. Yeah.
And Jung, he had a spirit, he had a background. I think his mother was a spiritualist, right? And kind of brought some of that more maybe psycho-spiritual perspective into things.
Yeah, I think his father was Protestant as well, so deeply religious origins. But then sort of finding the end of religious beliefs, and then sort of coming into an empirical understanding of the reality of the psyche. So for me, that's a jump that I've also had to take as well. And very much like mythology, but also Jung's teachings on all these things and how important they are have been very much quite life-saving for me in a lot of ways. So they're very important.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious about your own becoming story. Oh, and how you got to where you are right now. Can you share with us a chapter of your becoming story, one of those chapters that were really kind of part of your growth and your being much more open to learning some of the things that you've been learning and applying and writing about?
Yeah, of course. So, so my story. So how I've got to this point. I was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses. So it's quite a high control religion. It's quite quite difficult to define. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, my grandparents as well. So I was very much raised on the Old Testament. I was very much raised on story, but it was story used to indoctrinate, and it was very religious. So we had a very religious routine, and then when I was a young mother, when I just had my first child, I think started to question a little bit, but you're not really supposed to question. And I was feeling also quite unwell mentally. I was not in a very good place. So basically, over the course of a few years, started to question more and more. I was living with a lot of dissonance, which was very hard to sort of deal with. And I think what it was is I was coming to the end of my religious beliefs, and getting to a point where I did have to sort of ask what I was resisting asking, these questions, and also waking up to the reality that there was inhibitors to my growth. Unfortunately for myself and the children, my husband, who was also born into the religion, was in a similar process as well. He was questioning things, and so it was a very difficult process, and you sort of realize you have a bit of healing to do. You're raised very much with the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh. Carl Jung talked about him very much in his book Answer to Job, and to me, I realized that there was like an association there between God and trauma, where you're almost worshipping trauma, because the Old Testament view of the God image is very much that it's an antinomy, and you're supposed to challenge it, which is what helps you grow as a person. So it was very, very difficult process, and in doing so, we had to leave in the end, and we lost all our family because of a religious policy that when you start to question things, and if you go too far with it, you get deemed an apostate or a heretic, which was very, very difficult decision to make.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, to leave under those circumstances. But I think, going back to what you say about always becoming, I think sometimes that force of growth is so strong that it does break you out of circumstances that you don't think you could ever sort of overcome. So it was very much for us, it was like healing through our heresy. So we journeyed out, and it was very painful. And we came to sort of, you're descending a mountain of religious belief into like a valley of, it feels like a valley of despair, very much dark night of the soul, where you've lost everything, your worldview. But then with that, I started to discover things like active imagination. I did a lot of writing, which was very healing. And then it was after this that I discovered a lot of Jung's work, and his colleagues, such as Edward Edinger, who I found out later was also initially a Jehovah's Witness, and left. And he speaks very much about how you're in this sort of dark night of the soul, but then you come through that, and you start to understand the reality of the psyche, and that there has been this sort of very much like a guiding principle of growth that has been sort of leading you to places that, although hard, are breaking things open so that you can grow. It's a force that has very much helped remove the obstacles to us growing as people, really. So that's how we got to this point. And then through that as well, started studying myth, and understanding and meaning came into our lives, I guess, in a way that we'd never had before. So it was very much life-saving.
Just with everything you just said, it's just so beautiful. you wrapped up the whole thing. I mean, it's just so beautiful.
Oh.
Always talking about that whole idea that it really does take a lot of courage.
Yeah.
To follow that, where that with that inner that inner self is kind of pulling and saying, hey, this is the path, but then you've got all of this other stuff, the conditioning and the beliefs that like you said, you don't question it initially.
Yeah.
Or then you get to this place, I know even for myself, there's like, must be something wrong with me if I'm questioning some of these things, right?
Yeah.
And then the risk of being abandoned, being rejected, the loss, and you just shared all of that. What's your relationship like now with your parents and your family?
So I haven't seen my mum for quite a number of years, nearly a decade, and my grandparents. So we have no relationship with our family at all, which is very difficult. I do have a relationship with my father, who also left. So that's one member of the family. But it was either that or you lose your relationship, I think, with yourself. You lose your integrity and, wholeness, wanting to be whole and knowing that you've respected that force. It's a much better way to live. So we're a lot happier, although there's been a lot of grief there. You have to sometimes outgrow these things, because it's very much like a generational trauma and the compulsion. I think it was Freud who talked about this, but it's the compulsion is to repeat. And it's the God of the Old Testament really is it's like a quite I know it's a strong word, but quite a terroristic force over your life that would cause you to live in a way that isn't very there's no real will to live there. There's no real meaning. It's like it is very much a pointless suffering. So
it's very fear-based.
Yeah, it's very fear-based, which isn't very good for your growth at all. No. So yeah.
You talk about that kind of that intergenerational trauma, and it kind of loops around back, to each generation, and that is because people don't question, right? It's just like that is that unconscious unawareness and even maybe like a learned helplessness in a sense.
Yeah.
That, there's no point in questioning. It's too scary, and people don't even consider it an option. Like it doesn't even cross their mind, right?
Yeah, and it's very much unknown territory, and I think this is the thing, you have to trust this sort of I think Jung would call it the self, the sort of higher self, where there's this ordering principle that is beyond your sort of self-concept, and you have to trust this higher principle that's going to sort of, you feel like your life's falling apart, but the trust is that something's coming back together again in a bigger and more whole way. So although it's very scary, it's like challenging those beliefs and even ideologies as well. Coming to the end of that means that something greater can come in, and something deeper as well, which is why, going back to the mythology and why I write about these things, it's like moving the religious belief structure opened up my eyes really to a greater depth of meaning. So I'm able now, I guess, to read the stories as if they really are more objectively true. There's no gap between me and what the story's trying to say. It's just immediately sort of there, and that can really be very life-changing as well. It's like I forget the name of the writer now, but he wrote about the experience of the holy, that there's something very holy, something whole in this, that really can affect you imminently and change the course and the trajectory of your life. And I think that when often through the filter of religion, you don't always get that. There's like a lag, you can't quite actualize and individuate, I guess, in the way that you would if you're willing to let go of certain beliefs, and instead just
open-minded.
and to experience things directly, you know.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that if kind of like artwork, two people can look at the same picture and see a different thing, or find meaning in that same piece that is different, depending on who's looking at it? Would you say that myths or mythology is like that too? That it's personal. That what you learn or what you grasp from it is personal.
I think to a certain degree, yeah. I think this is what's so remarkable about it, that often, and this is the idea of synchronicity. Often you read something that's got a direct application to your own life, and it's deeply meaningful to you and where you're at with your life, and it stands out to you in a way that maybe someone else wouldn't be able to immediately understand, because it's not hitting them quite in that place in the same way, so it's very much, I think when that happens and you read something that's deeply personal and meaningful to you, it's like it's speaking to you on a level. It's you're hearing something that you individually need to hear, or you need to learn maybe something more about yourself, and I definitely think that's true.
Yeah. James Hollis, familiar? He's a Jungian analyst. And in a period of time, a couple of years ago, I was like kind of floundering. I had this, this question going, what's next? What's next in my life? And I felt like I had like no direction at all. And I went into a bookstore and I said, okay, I'm just going to be led wherever I need to be led, because like I would try to find books and I was like, I've read these books, if not these books just like them, and they're not doing it for me, right? And then all of a sudden I just walked right over to this book, and I knew right away, it was like, this is it. And it just shifted my life, and it spoke to me for sure. It was just one of those beautiful, they
are the beautiful moments when that happens. And I think it's not just books, but dreams and all these things, how the psyche communicates with us and gives us, I guess, direction when you feel like you've lost direction. It's pretty mysterious, I think. And I think this mystery and enchantment is something that I think we are missing very much culturally as well, because it affects people when they touch that something. It really does it. It's a wonderful feeling.
So I feel like I'm going to be asking silly questions. I'm going to say stupid, because they say there's no stupid questions, but no, silly ones.
You're right.
Have you found, or is it true that there's myths that you can find very similar kinds of stories in different parts of the world, at different eras, where there may not have been any kind of ability to communicate with each other, these cultures, yet they've created the same kinds of stories?
Yeah, so it's the idea of the collective unconscious. There are myths that, in one part of the world, you'll find a certain myth, and then in another part of the world, where they'll have had no ability to communicate, that they'll have very similar themes, like that you have the same sort of themes popping up in myth all over the world. And that's because, there's the aspect of the collective unconscious, where it's like the same source of these archetypal images that we all draw from. And, to me, that's really wonderful, because it shows that there is a common language, even if it's symbol, that we can all understand, and it connects us all in a very human way, no matter what culture, or the difference in language, or different in perspective, that there's these structures that are the same no matter who you are or where you are. And when we're disconnected, I think, from from that. There's always still an influence there, but we lose our ability to communicate it. You know, it all very much becomes babble where you can't hear one another. You know, so symbol's really important, and myth is a very important way of communicating those parts that, despite the differences, that we're all still deeply connected on. And it's like we've got to find that depth again, to find this unity, I guess, of our humanity. You know, it's very important.
Beautifully said. No, when I was going through your Instagram, I came across a book that you put on there, Kundalini Yoga by Jung.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me. First off, because I never heard the word Kundalini until just the beginning of this year. Never heard the word. I had a very, very strong and even a little bit scary experience that I told a friend, and she said, "Oh, it was a Kundalini awakening." And I was like, "I never heard of that." And I don't know if that's what it actually was. But I opened up my mind to understanding what did that mean, and what was that, and how it connected to spiritual awakening. And so then to see Jung, the title of a book, Kundalini Yoga, which I know that there is Kundalini Yoga, but for him to have actually written a whole book on it, what is your perspective about that in that book?
So he was very much exploring so the more Eastern traditions. But what's difficult is in the West, you know, we've got sort of like it's a bit difficult to go straight into Eastern traditions, because the idea that Jung sort of proposes that the Christian, the religion, the predominant religion of the West is Christianity, and that some people forget like this idea of our belief systems, and we go sort of straight to the East, but we become sort of dislodged from our own sort of cultural roots somewhat. But that at some point, I do think what he mentioned was that we will sort of find our own sort of access to what these Eastern teachings have already sort of understood. And with Kundalini Yoga, I think it's more like the somatic wisdom of the body, which, you know, people are talking about a lot more now, where we are, you know, in the UK and in the US, you know, yoga is a big thing. But then these are other things that help us to awaken this sort of wisdom of the body, like having that awareness of our internal experience of ourselves. But we can't forget the Western psychic origins and our belief systems, which are things that we've also got to overcome here, so that we perhaps understand the teachings of the East in a way that are appropriate. So yeah, it's very interesting because he explored a lot of things. But he also but he studied alchemy as well, and that was sort of like, in his eyes, I think he thought that was more like a Kundalini of the West. It was something that would very much help build the subtle body, the spiritual body, which is very healing to ourselves.
It's that wholeness, right? Yeah. So we're almost ready to wrap up. Oh my gosh, you're just beautiful. I just have to say that. Beautiful soul, so bright.
Oh, thank you.
I just learned so much just in this half hour from you. Tell me a little bit more about what you're actually doing now. I understand you're studying psychology, or what kind of psychology are you studying, and what are you planning? Where's your becoming story heading? Where are some of those future chapters that you believe will be happening?
So I want to keep writing. I want to keep exploring myth, like I have been doing, because like I said, it's pretty inexhaustible, and I think there's so much still to learn. But I am studying psychology at the moment, focused on child and adolescent psychology, which I'm finding, you know, really interesting. It's a direct application of these things, because I do feel like there's very real world problems on people perhaps like me who've sort of left religions, that this psychology is, it could be life-saving. So I'd like to perhaps, along with carrying on with my writing, I'm writing a book, but perhaps some point in the future, to work with people directly. So I don't know. I'm just sort of on a process, and I'm just going with it at the moment. And I'm very much enjoying the process. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're a mom of, is it 3 or 4 children and one on the way?
Yes, I have 4 children, and I'm 35 weeks pregnant currently.
Oh,
So,
wow.
a big amount of time is going to child rearing as well. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be very busy, I guess, over the next 2
Yes,
years. So,
yeah, you're very busy.
Yeah, but it's very rewarding, though, I guess.
Yeah.
Raising the kids and preparing them for this more technological world as well, and keeping them open and connected to that sort of deeper substructure of the psyche, making sure they stay human, is very important to my husband and I. So, yeah.
They're so fortunate because they've got a storytelling mom who, all moms try to be storytellers, right? But you're able to give them so much more depth to the meaning.
I hope so, because I think it's very important for little ones. Keeps their heart and nourishes the soul, doesn't it? Well, not just for little ones, but for everyone. So it's very important, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I like to end, if you can share with us a favorite mantra that you have, or a favorite quote or affirmation, something that you kind of take with you and that helps uplift you and support you on your own journey.
Okay. So I have actually thought of one, because earlier I couldn't quite think of one. But I've got it here, actually. It's a lady, she's called Barbara Black Koltov. And she said, women are always in the process of becoming. She says, as in weaving, raw material is gathered, washed, sorted, designed, drawn together, tightened, sometimes undone and reworked. And so women weave together all the elements of their lives into their own unique patterns. And I think that's really nice. It's very much in line with your podcast about becoming, and it doesn't just apply to women, but I suppose the female aspect in everyone, that becoming is the process of weaving our unique individual pattern and what we've got to offer. So that's a quote that I think is really helpful. I really like.
That's beautiful. How can people get in contact with you? I know Instagram is Storytelling Woman.
Storyteller Woman.
Storyteller Woman, and your website?
Yeah, it's storytellerwoman.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they can contact me that way as well.
Oh, great. I thoroughly encourage everybody who's listening to check you out, because you're just amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me on. It's been really nice talking to you as well. So thank you.
It's great to meet you. Okay. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Isn't she incredible? I learned a lot today. When I started this podcast, I thought I would be doing this to help others. I had no idea how much I would learn, how many amazing people I would meet around the world, and how my own becoming journey would be so enriched. Melissa shared a quote by Jungian analyst Barbara Black Koltov. Women are always in the process of becoming. As in weaving, raw material is gathered, washed, sorted, designed, drawn together, tightened, sometimes undone, and reworked. So women weave together all the elements of their lives into their own unique patterns. To even you men listeners, Remember that your becoming is a process where your life sometimes gets undone and reworked into your own unique story. Thank you for listening to Always Becoming podcast. Subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Tell your family and friends so they can also learn, be inspired, and grow from my guests. And follow me on Instagram. Every day is a new theme, all meant to support you, validate you, and encourage you while you travel along your becoming path. You can find me at becoming_with_Dr. Lynn. That is LYNNE. Thank you.